I've never seen a full professor paper torn to pieces the way this one has been.
Hi, everybody. I am Chad. I am here with Dr. Peterson, my former professor and doctorate, graduated from Harvard University. Great to have you.
Yeah, thank you. And that's what's brought me into this. People say, hey, you're from Harvard. What do you think about all this stuff going on with Harvard? But I see a lot of problems with this article just as a historian. If I'm a professor and I look at this paper coming in, I see a lot of academic problems with this paper.
Yeah, and that's exactly kind of, I think, what you said to me is, and the two articles that we're going to talk about, amongst other things, are scholarly articles that you found that we're going to be discussing. And I think the word you used on Facebook when you posted it was something like utterly destroyed Professor Ramsayer's argument, right? Which is, it's a very strong word, especially coming from you, I think.
Well, you know, when you have a controversy in academics, it's very often, if you've got a 20-page paper, the controversy centers on 1 or 2 pages, and there's a fine point that they're arguing about. But this thing is just faulty up and down the line. And this one paper just tears it to shreds. I've never seen a full professor paper torn to pieces the way this one has been.
Yeah, it's shocking, I guess, because this is the type of response you'd almost expect to see, like an undergraduate wrote a paper full of plagiarism and full of falsehoods and all these things. Yeah. And this is a professor of Harvard University getting absolutely torn to shreds by his colleagues for basically it being so inaccurate.
Well, the word you used, shocking, was exactly the word that the 5 scholars, the 2 papers we're going to look at today, I call them the 5-scholar paper and the 2-scholar paper. The 5-scholar paper, you got one from Northwestern, one from North Carolina, one from Cambridge in England, one from Singapore, and one from Japan itself, Aoyama University outside of Tokyo. They used the word shocking twice. The first time was when they said they found out about this in Japanese press releases. And that shocked them. And then they read the original article and they were already shocked, but now they're shocked squared because they're even more shocked when they actually read the actual article itself.
That tells you a lot right there, that you have 5 scholars from different universities who are experts in this matter and a lot of matters regarding Asian history. And they are shocked by a work of a Harvard professor. As I read through the article, there's a lot of things that they pointed out where I think this article, I mean, regardless of what your opinion is, regardless of what facts you're trying to follow with this, shouldn't really be a scholarly article, was my gathering from what they're saying.
And here's the thing, the review is 33 pages long.
Right.
The article is 16 pages long.
That's when you know you have a problem. When the rebuke of your article was twice as long as your article because there were so many things wrong with it.
And they said that their solution that they're proposing is that the article be withdrawn, that it is so flawed. Academic freedom doesn't mean you can publish lies and sloppy stuff. That's not academic freedom. Academic freedom is the ability to do research and to publish it and also to take criticism from it. And this thing is so heavily criticized. It just tears the article apart on sloppiness. This thing has 3.5 pages of criticism of the footnotes, of just the notation itself.
Right.
In the first 20, 25 pages, it criticizes the content, but then it says the footnoting, no page cited here, material here does not correspond to the content of the article. Just extremely sloppy footnoting and sloppy scholarship, if you want to call it scholarship.
Right. As I'm reading this article and they're pointing out all these flaws, these mistakes, my question is, Harvard is probably the most famous university on earth. How on earth does a Harvard professor write something like this?
You're right. And I think there are 2 issues here. Number one is this article is a historical piece, but it's written by a law professor. And a law professor may or may not have history background. And he doesn't couch this argument in any sort of historical context at all. For example, when you talk about the comfort women in Japan in the war, you have to talk about Nanjing. It existed before, but they really cranked it up after Nanjing because the soldiers went on this raping rampage in China. And they wanted to prevent that. That made them look bad in the international community and such. And it doesn't even mention that. So there's, it's a historical piece written by someone who doesn't obey historical rules. The 5-scholar article cites the American Historical Association standards for scholarship. And they say this article falls short of that. They're criticizing not this author personally, but the scholarship and the standards of scholarship are just really low. So I think one thing is it looks like a good piece of scholarship as a law piece. And the reviewers may have been lawyers who looked at, oh yeah, here's the cases, here's the precedents, and here's the law. Yeah, it looks good. I think that may have been how the thing got through. But you know, I was an editor for a time, and when we got a article that was interdisciplinary, you had to have people from different fields read it, not just the one field. And so this one, I think, was deprived of the fact of having a historian read it, because the historians just go off the charts on this thing. It's just, you know, just incredibly inaccurate from a historical point of view. That's the one problem. The other problem is I think he's writing to an audience, and the audience is Japan. I think he's not writing to the American audience because what he says feeds the right wing in Japan.
If I'm understanding you right, what you're saying is that, yeah, maybe from perspective of the law, what he's laying out logically could make sense, right? If he backed it up. But the problem is that historically, it's very inaccurate.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Historically, it ignores a lot of facts. One fact that I cite, when I wrote my letter to the journal, citing the problems that I saw with it, one of them was the historical context and the fact that this article only talks about Japan and Korea. But in reality, the comfort woman situation was severe for China, for the Philippines, for Southeast Asia, for Indonesia. And in Indonesia, I think the worst of these cases is that they used prisoners of war. That is to say, if they went into the Philippines and said, okay, we want to use your Philippine prostitutes, you know, if he's saying this is a prostitute operation, we want to use your Philippine prostitutes for our soldiers. Burma, we want to use your prostitutes for our soldiers. But in Indonesia, they captured Dutch women and they captured Australian women. And these are women who are expatriates. They're not protected by their home government. And they were captured as prisoners of war, held, which number one was probably a war crime in and of itself. And then they were coerced into joining the Comfort Corps. And some of these women had children. And that was the coercion point, because they said, gee, it'd be a shame to see your little boy there starve to death, wouldn't it?
Right.
You know,
that's the thing. I mean, if you're a prisoner of war, how are you possibly signing a contract for something like this? And what you point out about that he's writing this for an extremist Japanese audience makes sense, because he is very much focused on Korea, right? There's a reason for that. There's a reason that he's leaving out these other countries.
The other article, the criticism, the two author articles are from a Japanese professor, Andrew Gordon, and a Korean professor, Carter Eckert. And they both start off, they issued an earlier statement saying this article is devoid of historicity, it's devoid of logic. And they saw a lot of problems with it. So when they came out with their paper, I was expecting to see another 30-page critique. But they only had a 3-page critique, and they just said there's one major flaw here. And that is, this paper talks about law and contracts. And yet it produces no contracts. There's not an example of a contract footnoted at all. It mentions templates. The government provided a template for contracts, but there's no signed document. There's no evidence of anybody signing any sort of thing like this. So the Harvard response is just that there's no documentation. And here he's building the case on documenting this thing on the basis of legal contracts. There's not one legal contract.
Right. And I thought that was such a valid point to bring up, because the title itself of Ramsayer's article is, you know, contracting, right? I believe that's like what the first word in the title. And then, you know, so you expect he'd have some backup for it. There's no contract up here. I thought that was a very, very like valid point. And those were two Harvard professors, correct?
Right, right. Japanese and Korean specialists. One thing that I wrote in my critique was that even if these contracts were legal, even if we have the so-called contracts, that there's a good chance that many of the women were illiterate. And indeed, the 5 Professor article talks about one case where a woman is illiterate, and she talks about her 2 friends who were illiterate. And so what kind of a contract is that? You know, here, little girl, sign this thing. And and the article talks about a minimum age of 21. And yet time after time after time, we find, and Ramsayer himself cites a case of a girl who was 10. Right. Whose brother sends her off. It's just awful. Yeah. And it really is. Case, a woman is 16 and she said her friends were 14 and 15. Right. And there's plenty of cases where the women and girls talked about that they thought they were going for some sort of jobs, right? Yeah. So restaurants or factory. You've mentioned some of the responses that you've had yourself. Do you want to talk a little bit about anything that you've written about it? I'd be curious to hear about that. Well, I wrote an article for the Korea Times, where I have a regular article going, and I wrote an article for KoreaNet, which is the Korean Culture Ministry's official organ. And then I wrote the letter to the journal itself. Oh, I've done 2 YouTube presentations. And the response to that is I get people from LA, from all over Korea, saying my great aunt, my grandmother, giving personal examples just all over the place. Yeah. Either of women who were tricked into becoming comfort women, or women who did all sorts of things to escape. Yes. Yes. And that's one thing that I put in one of my articles. Was there was a woman that worked for me when I lived in Busan in the late 80s. She was born in the 20s, so she was in her 20s in the 40s. She was sent up to Harbin to live with her uncle, who was an officer in the Japanese army. And if they didn't think she was in trouble, why did they send her off 1,000 miles to be cared for by, you know, an uncle who could take care of her? Because they were afraid she was going to get snatched off the street. That's the same thing I've seen in the YouTube video that I did as I've gone through comments. For one, it's amazing to learn how many people in the comments who have had personal experiences, you know, family members themselves who are subjected to this. Based off the experiences and what people are saying about the great lengths they went to avoid being picked out and being sent to other countries and basically shipped out as sex slaves, it's a ton of people. And it seems to me that it was widespread knowledge what could happen to you, you know, if you were selected. I was so frustrated when I first heard about the Ramsayer article, and I didn't know if I wanted to make another video on it. But when you alerted me to these 2 articles, I was like, this is very important, because to just have this high level of critique, this across the board critique of Professor Ramsayer's paper, you know, I think that gives validity to the arguments that we're all putting forth that this is completely bogus. And so I'm really appreciative of all those professors basically, you know, taking their time to basically point out every flaw in his argument in every way that it's just not a valid or useful paper. It's not a valid piece of scholarship at all. It's not. The Japanese are generating this themselves. And it gets back to one basic question I've got. World War II, you've got 2 states that provoked the war, both of which committed unthinkable war crimes, but the Germans own up to it. Yes. They say, we made some mistakes. That was then, this is now. We're not like that anymore. The Japanese say, oh, we don't have a problem here. It was all legal. You know, we didn't commit any war crimes. We're good people. We don't do this sort of stuff. So, you know, the way that they go on hiding it, they take it out of the textbooks. They had comfort women in the textbooks, I understand. And now they've pulled it back out so that don't teach the next generation about it. Right. I mean, it's just full on censorship to save face, I guess. I would love nothing more than to not have to specifically talk about how Japan is hiding this and all these things. I would way rather spend my time talking about honoring the comfort women and, you know, all those who sacrificed them and all the, you know, the horrific war crimes that they faced and honoring that. But it feels like we can never do that because you put up a statue and, you know, Japan is furious that there dare be a statue
honoring, these women. And I don't understand it, I guess. And I don't understand Professor Ramsayer's motivation behind all of this.
Yeah.
Because there has to be motivation. There's a reason behind it.
Yeah, it's unclear. Yeah, that's a question.
So after we release this video, I think right after we release this video, we're going to do a live stream. Basically, as soon as I think this goes live, we'll do a live stream. I think that'd be a great opportunity for the viewers to ask you some questions, Dr. Peterson, and just maybe get the insight of the viewers and, whatever questions they have for you in terms of, you being graduate of Harvard and having, a lot of knowledge in kind of the scholarly area.
And concerns that my alma mater is being dirtied.
That's right. That's right. It's not leaving a good look for those in Korea and those across the world.
And it's too bad because it's not Harvard's fault, but people don't know that. And on the other hand, Japan is saying, "Hey, look, Harvard's on our side on this thing."
Exactly. And that's where I feel the need in terms of the signatures that we're getting on my video. I would like Harvard to say something. I'm not saying what they have to say specifically or what action they need to take, but at the very least, I would love for them to say, this is not associated to us. This has nothing to do with us. This is not our opinion.
They could say that there was an article written by one of their professors that has met with a firestorm of criticism, academic criticism. And we feel that this scholarship does not depict the best of Harvard University. We think it's unfortunate that it happened. They could say that.
Yeah, and I absolutely think they should.
Yeah.
But we will see. So we're going to wrap up this video here. We will put links to all the scholarly articles, the links to Dr. Peterson's work that he's done recently. And then right now, we're going to start a live stream. So refresh your page, go to your homepage, and you'll find the live stream. You'll see it pop up, and we will talk to you guys soon.
See you in a minute.
Okay.
Hey,
bye.
Thanks, Chad.